Everybody complains about inflation. Your money buys less, the prices at the store keep climbing, and your savings quietly shrink. But here is the strange part that almost nobody talks about. The wealthy do not actually fear inflation at all. In fact, a great many of them quietly get richer because of it. Because inflation was never just simple destruction. It is a transfer, a giant, silent wealth transfer, moving money from one group of people straight to another. And the rich have spent entire generations learning exactly how to land on the winning side of it. So here are the 8 ways they actually do it. First, you have to understand the one core idea underneath all 8. Inflation punishes one thing above all else, and that is cash, and the people who hold it and lend it out. And at the very same time, it quietly rewards one thing, ownership, and the people who borrow. So the entire game, start to finish, is simply moving yourself out of that first group and into the second. And once you start to see inflation this way, as a quiet transfer instead of a pure disaster, the whole thing suddenly stops being something that just helplessly happens to you, and it becomes something you can calmly position yourself around. The first way is the foundation everything else is built on. The rich do not keep their wealth sitting in cash, which is the one single thing that inflation guarantees will shrink. Instead, they hold it in assets, businesses, stocks, real estate, the kinds of things that naturally tend to rise as prices rise. Cash, to them, is simply where wealth goes to slowly melt away. Assets are where it goes to quietly grow. Picture 2 people during a long decade of inflation. One keeps $100,000 sitting safely in the bank. The other puts that very same $100,000 into stocks and property. 10 years later, the saver still has roughly $100,000 that now buys far, far less, while the owner's assets have climbed right along with prices. Same starting money, opposite endings, decided entirely by what they chose to hold. The bank felt safer the whole way. It was quietly the more expensive choice. The second way is that they take on fixed-rate debt completely on purpose. Because when you owe a fixed amount of money, inflation quietly shrinks the real weight of that debt a little more every single year. You borrow expensive dollars today, and then you get to repay the loan with cheaper, weaker dollars tomorrow. In a very real sense, inflation itself is silently paying down a part of their loans for them. This is exactly why a simple fixed-rate mortgage can quietly be one of the most quietly powerful tools a completely normal person will ever own. You lock in a single payment today, and 20 years from now, you are still paying that exact same frozen number, but with dollars worth a fraction of what they are right now. Inflation does not just leave your mortgage alone, it actively erodes it for you. The third way is that they deliberately combine those first 2 moves together. They use that cheap, fixed-rate debt to go and buy even more appreciating assets. So the asset rises in value right along with inflation, while the debt against it quietly shrinks under that same inflation, and the gain gets magnified. Now, to be fair, leverage like this cuts in both directions, and it is exactly what the wealthy do. Not a suggestion, but it is a massive part of the engine. The fourth way is that they own businesses, or simply shares of businesses, that have the power to raise their own prices whenever their costs go up. Because while your wages might sadly lag behind inflation, a strong company just passes those higher costs straight along to its customers. So its profits, and therefore its stock, tend to climb right alongside rising prices instead of getting crushed by them. Quick, honest note right in the middle here. None of this is financial advice, it is just how the mechanics of inflation tend to work. Your situation is entirely your own. Now, back to it, with the 4 most powerful ones still to come. The 5th way is that they absolutely love real estate, and for one very specific reason. Because the rent that a property brings in tends to rise right along with inflation, while a fixed mortgage payment on that property does not move at all. So their income from it climbs higher every single year, while their single biggest cost stays completely frozen in place. And the gap between those two numbers just keeps widening automatically, entirely in their favor. The 6th way is that they treat any idle cash like a literal melting ice cube. They keep just enough on hand for genuine safety and for grabbing opportunities, and they put every other dollar to work, fast. The average person feels wonderfully safe holding lots of cash. But the wealthy understand a quiet truth, that this so-called safe cash is actually losing them just a little bit of its value every single day. And this is exactly where most people get it completely backwards. They feel anxious in the market and perfectly calm in cash, when inflation quietly makes the opposite true. Cash feels safe, but it quietly guarantees a small, steady loss. Assets feel risky, but they are how you actually keep pace. The feeling and the math point in 2 entirely different directions. The 7th way is that when inflation really starts running hot, they tilt their money toward scarce, hard assets. The kinds of things that simply cannot be printed into existence. Real estate, certain commodities, and ownership stakes in real productive things. Because scarcity is the natural-born enemy of a currency that is being printed in greater and greater quantities. When dollars get more common, the things that stay rare quietly get more valuable. And the 8th way is that they use the tax rules that quietly favor the owners of things. Long-term gains are taxed far more gently than ordinary wages are. Real estate hands them generous depreciation write-offs, and their gains get to compound completely untouched for years before any tax is ever even due. So inflation inflates the size of their gains, and the tax code then politely lets them keep much more of the result. And when you stack all 8 of these on top of one another, year after year, you start to see exactly why the gap between owners and savers tends to widen during inflation, instead of shrink. It is not luck, and it is certainly not some conspiracy. It is simply a different starting position, repeated and quietly compounded over time. So step back now and notice the single thread tying all 8 of these together. Because every one of them is really just the same idea, wearing a slightly different suit. Own, do not lend. Borrow fixed, do not save loose. Hold assets, never just cash. Inflation, at its core, is simply a tax on everyone who sits perfectly still holding dollars, and a quiet gift to everyone who instead owns the actual things that dollars buy. The rich never escaped inflation. They simply positioned themselves, very deliberately, to ride on top of it. And here is the part that truly matters. The part I really want you to hear. Absolutely none of this requires you to already be rich in order to start. You can own a simple, low-cost index fund. You can hold a fixed-rate mortgage instead of renting forever. You can stop hoarding cash far beyond your emergency fund. You do not need millions of dollars to climb onto the winning side of inflation. You just need to actually own something. Tell me in the comments, Just type the word OWN if this completely changed how you think about inflation. And if you want the next breakdown, the one on exactly which assets protect you best when inflation strikes, it is waiting for you right now. I read every single one.